Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watch You Want. Thanks for logging on. Today, we're looking at a Skyborn classic. This is the Rolex GMT-Master 1675 Pepsi bezel, 39 millimeters in stainless steel. This example, from the 1,600,000 serial number reference range, is roughly a late 1965 to early 1966 watch. Now, the 1675 is considered by many to be the definitive GMT-Master. Its production from 1959 to 1980 means that it effectively spans the era from late doo-wop to early hair metal, and that's quite a feat. So as a long-running standard in the Rolex catalog, the 1675 saw a lot of running changes, and I'm going to go over those as I give you the on-the-wrist impression. Now, first and foremost, you can see 39mm stainless steel, classical, mid-60s, professional watch proportion and profile. It's nevertheless quite slim. These older professional watches tend to play exceptionally well with tight dress cuffs, long sleeves. Again, the 1675 is emblematic of that. The GMT Master didn't become truly huge until 2005 with the debut of the Super Case. So the bottom line is that short of, deep diving, there isn't an occasion where you would not want to wear this watch. Now, my wrist is 6 1/3 inches, 16 centimeters in circumference, roughly average shape, a little bit below average size, but the watch sits flat and flush, and this gorgeous folded link bracelet is very supple, very light on the wrist, unobtrusive, exactly as you'd want with a watch that is designed to go on and stay on as professional equipment. It's also worth mentioning that a lot of the running changes I discussed are evident in this GMT Master 1675. Now you can see that the 24-hour hand has what's known as the broad arrow. This supplanted the much smaller arrow on the 24-hour hand during the mid-60s. Also, it has the matte dial with the white printing and no chaptering. This was likewise an early 1960s evolution that generally upgraded the readability of the watch and gave it a more contemporary, less antiquated look. Moreover, you can see that the crown guards are the fuller, later versions. Earlier on, they were tapered, a little bit spare, elegant, but the crown was a bit vulnerable. This gives the watch a little bit more protection mechanically, but it also gives it a bit more stance and presence on the wrist. Now, beyond the aesthetic refinements and aesthetic changes here, and they are quite dramatic compared to the early 1675s, inside the case, about midway through the 1960s, Rolex added the high beat reference 1570 movement. Now, the 1570 was the high beat, 19,800 vibrations per hour compared to the 18,000 predecessor, and the key there is that it's just a little bit less likely to be upset by chance variations in your wrist where you might shake, you might stutter, you might, with a slower beat movement, accidentally jar it in a way that's in sync with the harmonic of the balance and offset the timing a bit. The faster you run the balance, generally the less susceptible the watch is to that kind of variation. So midway through the 60s, Rolex was aesthetically and mechanically updating the GMT Master, and this 1675 has a lot of those running refinements. Now, the other nice thing about it, and I'm just going to call this out real quick before I talk about other elements, is that it has a beautiful and beautifully preserved domed plexi, and a plexiglass is completely different from modern sapphire in that it is part of the vintage appeal. The way it distorts light at oblique angles adds a gorgeous sort of warping pattern. It doesn't hinder legibility, but it is a charming, becoming, endearing feature of an older watch. It's something I look for on a vintage piece simply because every one has a different effect to it. It's very individual to the watch and the shape of the individual crystal, and discovering that effect over time through the course of ownership of a luxury watch, a vintage one, is a real pleasure. Now, the GMT is the quintessential pilot's watch. I should mention, when talking about who this watch is for, when I was in the Navy, many pilots owned these. The bottom line is that the famed Pepsi bezel stainless steel combination wears well with anything. Now, they generally owned newer references of the GMT Master, but the effect and the versatility was a point well taken on my part. It might be the only men's fashion accessory that's equally acceptable in military coveralls and a tuxedo. Again, that's just my theory, but it seemed to hold up in practice. A beautiful watch, very, I would say very Rolex in every respect. This look is something Rolex pioneered. It's not just iconic of their line, but it is truly their own. In 1954, when the GMT-Master debuted, Rolex had actually developed it in conjunction with their commercial partner Pan Am Airlines, and the idea was to create the first watch that was automatic winding and featured a 24-hour hand with a bi-directional bezel, so that with that 24-hour hand, the watch could permanently be set to Greenwich Mean Time, the standard of reference and the only time used by aviation units, that's air traffic control, and pilots around the world at all time. It helps to coordinate when everyone agrees what time it is, common sense. But how do you find the local time at an airfield? Well, you offset plus or minus from GMT using the bezel, and that's how a dual time watch was done in the mid-1950s. This watch does have the 24-hour hand geared to the hour hand, the local hour hand. As a GMT Master, if you want to get the second time zone, you offset from GMT appropriate to the time zone in question. The GMT Master 2s featured an independently movable 24-hour hand that could be set to a truly different time zone than the local hour hand, and those can actually compute 3 time zones using the bezel. I do want to be clear about that for those who might be new to the model. But while this is a great watch for aviation enthusiasts and pilots alike, it's also a great watch for the general enthusiast of Rolex. With impeccable provenance and outstanding condition, you can buy this vintage piece with confidence. If you're looking to start a Rolex collection, it's a fantastic first vintage piece. Universally respected, everyone loves it, well known, there's a permanent market and a permanent online and in-person fan following. Show up with this at Red Bar, and it doesn't matter how many Grand Complication Patek Philippe's are in the crowd, this is going to elicit smiles. A beautiful piece that just about everyone loves, whether they're Rolex fans or not. It's also the perfect piece to complete a Rolex collection. If you have one of everything and you're looking for a beautiful mid-60s GMT Master 1675, this just could be the watch you want.